Nico. Should be locking on. Nico, are you there?
Hi, Matt.
How's it? How's it going?
Good, thanks. And yourself?
Yeah, very well, thanks, man. So we're just waiting for a few of the students to kind of log in here, but I'll just accept them as they kind of get on. First of all,
No
I'm
problem
really
at all.
liking the background there. It's a bit more classier than my little background, yeah.
I thought it'd be quite fitting with the theme of last night's Champions League, especially Bayern Munich's win.
Yeah, what did you think of the game, by the way?
Very comfortable, as expected, so
Easy.
nothing new.
Yeah, the Germans now to
trust
pull
the
it off.
Germans.
Yeah?
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think, Nico, we might as well just go ahead and get started because I don't want to take up too much of your time. The students can log on when they
No problem.
Yeah. So just before we start, first of all, thanks very much for joining us today and for taking
thank
some
you very
time
much.
off your
Honored to be here.
schedule. So our guest for today is obviously Nico Wohlfarth. Correct me if I'm saying it wrong.
Yeah, Wohlfarth, it's fine.
So Nico, I guess before we start, do you want to maybe just give us a little brief introduction of who you are, what you're currently involved in, like what your process has been to get there?
Yeah, so I'm the sports scientist of Cape Town City Football Club. We are the biggest football club in the Western Cape, and we compete on the national level in the PSL. To get there, through my education, I studied alongside Matt himself.
Yeah.
He did a sports science degree. Then I graduated with honors in high performance. And before that, I also had a national certificate in coaching sciences through ETA at the exact college that you're at right now.
Yeah, so we the students, the diploma sports and exercise students, but I know you had mentioned about your kind of ETA college course. Did you do that? You obviously did that before you kind of studied sports science.
Yes, so when I left high school, I played football in Germany for a year, after which coming back, I wanted to try out my skills in coaching, and ETA was the perfect, I found, introduction into coaching sciences. It was very broad, had a fantastic spectrum, and honestly, it sparked my inspiration to just get involved and start teaching and getting my coaching badges done. And yeah, it was a fantastic start. I had a great lecturer, Marlon Reed. I don't know if he's still around there.
He's actually at the moment. He's more on the management kind of side of things. Yeah, so Marlon's currently our head of kind of academics, and then he's also on the sports management kind of side as well. Yeah, but it's awesome. It's always great to chat to some kind of past students of ETA College, and I think kind of the students that are here now, they've been here for 3 years. So kind of the next step is how do they take this stuff and put it into a practical sense. So that's why we're wanting to do these kind of interviews and just engage with industry experts like yourself. So I've got a few questions, and then I'm basically just going to open the floor and just let the students kind of engage with you, if that's all right.
Perfect. I'm happy to get started.
But I guess the first kind of thing, and I don't want to spend too much time on kind of COVID-19, but with the PSL starting and stuff now, kind of how's it been? What measures have PSL put in place? And for you guys, how's it been juggling all of that?
So it's been quite an unprecedented approach to sport. For myself, extremely interesting. It's the first time in the history that we now had an off season of about 5 months of no competition whatsoever into a compressed season of, we just recently had 4 games within 10 days.
Jeez.
Which has never been done before.
Yeah.
So we are in unknown territory, and we've been prepping for those 5 months just for this past week. And fortunately enough, Cape Town City has won 3 out of 4 games, which is fantastic in my books.
Had a good win against the Orlando Pirates yesterday.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we had hoped to start the league a bit earlier during level 3 lockdown even. And even before that, but naturally there's a lot of logistics that needs to be in place and compliance from health and safety side, as well as the World Health Organization.
Yeah.
So once that was all put in place, we communicated with the clubs, as well as with the governing bodies of the PSL and the National Soccer League.
Yeah.
And through that cooperation, we were able to provide a protocol that was specific to the National Soccer League. So all the PSL clubs, as well as the NFD clubs, which is a league below us, that is 32 teams who were then expected to finish the season within a period of about a month's time.
Jeez. Yeah.
Now, that is quite chaotic in
Yeah.
theory. And however, I must admit, in the past 2 weeks that we have been in what's called a biologically safe environment, which is a bubble in Johannesburg,
Yes, yeah.
where the teams are stationed inside a hotel. We may not leave the hotel other than for training and for match days.
Sure.
So we're not necessarily, we're not allowed to see
anyone.
family, not allowed to see friends, correct?
Jeez.
We can't go out, can't go to the shops, but it's for our own health and safety. So in this whole period of time, we've prepared, I'd say, to the detail, like myself, I've been a health and safety compliance officer for our club.
Yeah.
In other words, I ensure that the protocol has been put in place, that it is practically being applied, that it is successfully applied, with the sense that it is a zero tolerance. So one mistake, one slip up, one player who does not fill in a daily questionnaire form pertaining to his health and any symptoms he may have relating to COVID, it may cost us a match, it may cost us a player for a game.
Jeez, that's crazy. And I guess that kind of responsibility comes on your head then as well, because you don't want it to be one of your players.
Yeah. So naturally, it's not only my responsibility, but we do try enforce responsibility on an individual level amongst the players and the staff that are here. Sure.
Yeah. So I mean, I know NBA have kind of been doing a very similar thing. I think they're all locked in Disneyland at the moment.
Correct.
Disney World.
Yeah.
I've seen a few videos on that. But from a kind of coaching and conditioning perspective, how have you kind of had to adapt things so that you obviously aren't over kind of fatiguing your players and making sure that they're recovered enough, having such a kind of hectic schedule, such a compressed schedule? What have you had to kind of adjust to ensure that takes place? Or that
so that started already a few months back when the lockdown hit in March. We didn't completely go into a full, how can I say, off season. We started with Zoom sessions 4 times a week with our players. We started using players with, remote running. So a lot of our players downloaded an app called Strava, and then we could actually monitor and see their progress on road running, not necessarily running on a football field, but it's as close as we could get.
Yeah.
And then when we hit the field, we started with individualized training where players had access to the equipment, they had access to the field when it was legal by the government, and we got the go-ahead by the National Soccer League, and players started then. That was around May. And then June, we were able to start, I think, end of June with team training.
Yeah.
And now all this had the bigger picture in mind that we are now entering a compressed season.
Yes.
We didn't know when. That was a big problem. So we would hear next week we're flying, and that process happened over a 4-week period where we hear, be ready next week, be ready next week.
Jeez.
So essentially that was creating the foundation. And now that we are inside this bubble, it's pretty much perform, recover each day.
So I guess in that kind of off-season, pre-season, you just need to make sure the guys are like going to sort of be at peak for performance in coming to the season, and you just try and maintain as much as possible.
Again, it was near impossible to hit actual peak performance with such a short, I think we had about 3 to 4 weeks of a pre-season to prepare for this.
Yeah.
So we did enough research, and we were very specific with what training we would do.
Yes, yeah.
And we were able to prepare the players in not to make them fit as possible, but as fit for the philosophy that we are trying to play on a match day.
Yeah, sure. And are you able to share a bit about what that kind of would incorporate? What kind of fitness modalities would you mostly focus on?
Of course. So we follow something called tactical periodization.
Yeah.
And that model is a Portuguese model that works in microcycles from match day to match day, whereby you cover multiple energy systems on different days. So one day, let's say match day -2, which would be 2 days before match day, we would cover our speed as well as all types of speed components that we would want. On match day -3 would be more of a strength day. You cover all the strength components. Match day -4, an endurance day. So that way we are able to, how can I say, within a week, we are able to periodize different spikes of load and intensity.
Okay.
Now that volume and intensity relationship needs to be handled and adjusted each day, but that's where my job comes in.
Okay.
And then to answer your question with the philosophy, if you watch our football, we play a very possession-based game, whereby other teams will play a lot more hit the ball long and run. we tend to build up. So that pertains to a lot of small-sided games, a lot of covering, where my favorite metric to observe is meters per minute in relative distance.
Yeah, sure.
And that's where we prioritize our efforts.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, we kind of been chatting about this in our one module at the moment, performance analysis, but it's got to do with time motion analysis. So basically GPS monitoring and those kind of things, distance covered, speed covered in games and training. So I'm sure you guys have some pretty high-tech GPS monitoring, but could you maybe explain just to students how do you use it first of all, and what kind of information does it give you that you can kind of apply in a practical sense?
So GPS itself is extremely overwhelming if you start off with it and you don't know what you're doing. You are provided with, I'd say, close to 100,000 to 200,000 data points.
Jeez.
And that is for one session, one team.
Yeah.
So if you don't specifically know or want to know what you're looking for, you may get lost in the data. So it is my job as a sports scientist to streamline that information and make it as small and compact as possible and presentable as possible for the coach in order that he can make his decisions.
Yeah.
So what I look at is within the session itself, who performed at what level compared to the others. So intra-team comparison.
Yeah.
Then I also compare each individual player's score to their norms.
Yeah.
So their norms could be a match day norm. Their norm could be another match day -3 norm if it's on the specific training day we've had in the past.
Yeah.
Those are the norms we look at. And within looking at those norms, I try to pick up, is the play improving? Is maybe not improving, and therefore his performances are decreasing over time?
Yeah.
It could be an indicator for chronic overload.
Yeah, sure.
Or is there an abnormality? Is something wrong? Is there a massive spike, whether it's negative or positive?
Yeah.
So these are little indicators and factors. And one of the most important things about GPS is it's not an end all. It is merely a perspective.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess there's so many things can play into it from day to day, if you know what I mean. If you've had players that have enough sleep, nutrition, those kind of things could all affect just the one day's kind of training worth, I guess.
Exactly. It's one factor amongst many to look at.
Yeah.
So it is a very important factor. It is an objective load. In other words, you cannot cheat it in that sense. Yeah. Players usually like to have an excuse for here and there for other variables and factors in play, but with GPS, the numbers don't lie.
Yeah, no, exactly. And what are the kind of metrics, the main metrics that you would kind of focus on? You mentioned meters per second. So those kind of things, what other metrics would you mainly focus on? Distance covered, would that be a big factor? Or yeah,
so we get provided by each, how can I say, GPS system has different metrics that it does provide, more specifically to the types of velocity zones. But I try and think that less is more. So I look at distance, very simple, sprint distance, and that is more focused on movements above 16 kilometers an hour. High intensity sprint distance, so that is above 24 to 26 kilometers an hour.
Yeah.
We look at top speeds. Sure. Then we look at relative distance, which I mentioned, meters per minute.
Yeah.
And then furthermore, now those 5 metrics I'll present to the coach. This is the ones that he's interested in, he's happy with, it's perfect, it'll get us from day to day.
Yes.
Myself personally, when I start doing like return to training for injured players, or more specifically in preseason, I'll also look at acceleration and deceleration metrics for the different velocity zones.
Yeah.
Naturally, my players need to be able to decelerate at a specific zone that is relatable to a match day.
Yeah, of course.
And furthermore, also, I like to break it up into the velocities into walking, jogging, running, sprinting, and high intensity running.
Yeah. And does that allow you to periodize according to that kind of, or plan your sessions according to that, knowing exactly what a player is going through from match day to know exactly during training what they need to kind of put their bodies through, put it that.
Yes, exactly. So we want to make it as specific to match day as possible. A match day or even a friendly match is the perfect conditioning for a match.
Yeah.
Don't get better football conditioning than actual football.
No, exactly.
And then we try to relate that to specific drills. And that's where I personally have a knack for coaching, where I did my coaching badges in Germany. And that is another perspective I like to apply, because how am I able to hit specific metric distances with specific drills? Yeah. And that goes hand in hand with our philosophy, with small-sided games, with different tactical movements.
Tactical, yeah. Yeah, that was actually kind of leading on to my next question. I was going to, because you obviously, I think you've done UEFA B badges, if I'm not Correct. So yeah, obviously, I mean, you pretty much almost it's UEFA A and then what, pro license after that, or youth.
Yes, correct.
Pro,
hopefully one day.
Yeah, I know my coaching pathways. But I mean, I wanted to ask you, how do you kind of, and you might have answered it, but how do you combine the coaching side with the conditioning side? Because we've obviously had a few chats about small-sided games and how useful they actually are in terms of like combining both, basically. So yeah, how else do you kind of combine the two kind of systems, conditioning, coaching?
So naturally, you have, for conditioning and coaching, you've got objectives on either side.
Yeah.
And in the past, one thing I've learned is they can actually confront one another, in the sense that the coach will always want 100% out of the players all the time, and whereas the conditioning is much more systematic, long-term driven.
Yeah.
So in that sense, one thing I like to do is I like to make the conditioning as relatable as possible for the coach as well as myself. So if I want to hit top speed distances, I'm not going to suggest a small-sided game. I'm rather going to manipulate the field size, have it nice and big. Yeah. And if I want the player to work more, I'd actually go, instead of going a 10v10 training session, we'd actually minimize that to a 5v5 or 6v6.
Yes.
So the individual load is much higher because he has to work more touches, more contacts.
Yeah.
And one more thing is, as a coach, it's your instinct to coach.
Yeah.
Yet,
sure.
Naturally, as a conditioning coach, you want your player working for arbitrary unit of like 2 minutes. Yet the coach sees something at the 1 minute 30 mark that he has to address.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you actually try and manipulate the minutes worked, or you try, of the small-sided games, so that the recovery and rest available are coaching moments.
Okay.
Where players feel like they're learning and they're listening to the coach, but it's actually recovery that you've planned ahead.
Yeah.
So you're kind of manipulating the circumstances under which the coach is providing information and applying his technique and philosophy.
Yeah, I must say that's definitely something I've actually haven't really thought of, because I also love small-sided games. But like you said, your coaching instinct just kicks in and you want to stop them immediately and kind of rectify and say this, that. But then they obviously only just played for a minute. Now they've rested for 2 minutes to go play for another minute before your next coaching point. It's actually, from a conditioning side, you're not actually really working at the desired kind of outcomes of what you want. So yeah, exactly. I guess building that in is something I've actually never kind of thought of as well.
Yeah, we did.
Sorry.
No, carry on. It's fine.
No. Yeah, so I don't want to take up too much of the questions, but I think just one for the students, and I know they'll love this if you can kind of provide maybe even some of your kind of places where you find this stuff. But where do you kind of find inspiration for your exercises within your program or your small-sided games? And yeah, how do you find motivation and different exercises to keep things interesting?
So what I started off doing was shadowing like crazy. Yeah. Not necessarily other football coaches, but other S&C coaches from other sports.
Yeah.
Like I've joined a friend of mine who was a kickboxer, and his kickboxing sessions, naturally in football, you're kicking as well. So I'd shadow and I'd observe, and that's where inspiration hits. You start getting creative with movements. What can I apply in my environment? So you take that little bit out. So try to find inspiration from other sports, other coaches, your peers even.
Yeah.
And one of the most important things is talk and communicate with them, in the sense that be willing to criticize them, in the sense that you're challenging them as well as challenging your own, understanding of a sport.
Yeah.
And then secondly, one of the most freely available things is the internet. There are hundreds, if not thousands. There's an overload of information out there and exercises. So I use Instagram a lot of professional football players, coaches that I look up to, old mentors. They're constantly posting ideas. They're not always good, but they're not always, something that I have not seen before.
Yeah.
So I grab from there, I save it all. I've got myself a massive hard drive that's just full of ideas. And you just try and organize that. And then some days you have a little creative block. You just go in there, look for some inspiration and pull it out.
Put your stuff in. Yeah. I think with the internet, I also agree there's tons of stuff there, but it also is then up to you to know what is the good stuff and what is absolute rubbish. Because tons of good stuff, like there's also a whole lot of rubbish as well that is on there. Personally, I think Instagram is great. That's probably where I get most of my exercises and different new ideas, stuff like that. Because I just follow a whole lot of random different people, and then eventually when you start going onto your explore page, more stuff pops up, and then you go into that, and
True.
yeah, so it's definitely is. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the floor for some students to ask you some questions. I know Jared over here has been waiting for a while to ask you some questions. So if you guys want to go ahead, you can maybe just put your hand up or something like that, and then I'll unmute you and put your video on, and you guys can ask away. I don't know who wants to go first. Might be some nervous students today. Jared, are you there? Okay, Jared's going to go. I'm going to unmute you. You can put your video on as well, Jared, so we can see you.
Yeah, just sorting it out. Okay, cool. Yeah. All good.
How's it?
Good, thanks to you.
Yeah.
How's it?
Good.
Good. Mainly, I just want to sort of ask how you got into the whole Cape Town city setup. Because I've been trying to contact them with regards to some work experience or the possibility of an internship for next year. So I was just curious as to how you got to where you are now.
So what I did was, alongside my studies, I started shadowing specific individuals in the industry. And through that networking, I was able to meet someone that is working at Cape Town City. I was, I think, at a tournament, and then I met an old friend of myself, which is Lee Miles, a colleague of mine now. And the internship opportunity arose, and I was studying full time, and I actually had to skip classes. I accepted the internship. It was unpaid. So I worked for a good, I think, 7-8 months, unpaid internship, my own petrol, just going through to Cape Town from Stellenbosch every single day.
Yeah.
And through that, they enjoyed my presence. They liked what skills I brought to the table, and I was hired part-time, and from part-time to full-time. So it was more about getting involved, and the internship possibilities, the opportunities are there for you. I'm happy to put you in contact. We take about 2 to 3 interns every 3 months. So it's a nice long spectrum. You get involved with our youth teams, as well as a taste and feel of the first team. So it is quite extensive, and it is available.
Okay, yeah, that would be very, very nice if possible, please.
No problem at all. Matt will put us in contact.
Yeah, we'll discuss afterwards, and I can kind of forward all the details onto you guys. Okay. Do you have any other questions, Jared?
No, that was about it.
Are you sure? Jared hasn't been at class too much, so I assumed you would have a lot of questions because he's missed out on a lot. But
well, no, I've been working hard on the periodization, so I know what he was talking about and what's going on. So
okay,
that was all.
Yeah, I think we've had a big discussion on different periodization types, Nico, in terms of obviously linear, undulating, and that kind of stuff. And tactical periodization is something that we probably need to spend a bit more time on, especially for team sports kind of perspective. So we'll maybe go into a bit more detail on that kind of thing. But do you know who came up with the tactical periodization kind of concept?
Oh, okay. It was, I don't have his name off the top of my tongue, but it was a Portuguese fellow, and it was then adapted by quite a few coaches. One of the most famous is Raymond Verheyen. And he took it to the absolute T of working out every single minute of rest versus minute of workload of every single training session, which is a fantastic start for tactical periodization. And from there, it was a snowball effect because the football season is not necessarily relatable to other seasons in other individualized sports. Yeah. It is very dynamic. You have a lot of competitions within one season. Yeah. And through that, you cannot linear progress each week, or how can I say, each month, and look for peaking twice a season. You kind of have to peak each week as it's the best. Yeah.
Would you guys, from a kind of talking about peaking and tapering, would you guys kind of obviously try and peak pretty much day in, day out, well, for your matches, but would you target certain other matches, say for instance in a certain tournament or something like that, where you like really want to peak, so you'd 2 weeks before that kind of be overloading them and then taper, or would it just kind of be pretty much every match you want to be at the same sort of level if possible?
So it comes down to the circumstances and the context. Naturally, we try to prioritize as much as possible. As you said, specific matches are more important than others, depending on the competition. Luckily, in football, you have a squad of 20 to 30 players. So you're not preparing all 30 players for a game in 3 weeks' time. You can that way you can balance it out with a few players for different matches. So in that sense, if you're going to work from week to week, you can actually, how can I say, if you do your recovery well on a match day +1, or even a taper extremely well match day -1, -2, you can perform and recover within the time limit. And again, the most important thing you'd want to be overloading is different energy systems, whether it's endurance, whether it's the more intensive side. So it depends on prioritization.
No, definitely. I think that's, those discussions obviously happen between you guys if you're conditioning and the coaches and stuff, and you need to be very open with each other and what needs to happen and what is realistically can happen as well.
Correct. That's what I find is there needs to be a very important relationship between the coach, the conditioning coach, as well as the player itself. Because you're going to be working with a lot of different types of players. We've got players that are over 30 years old who can't play week in, week out. However, we also have youngsters in the team who can play honestly week in, week out. Nothing wrong with them. They need minimal recovery and they're good to go. So everyone's different within a team, and that's my job to individualize our conditioning, not only to the team, but to each player.
Sure. Are there any other questions? Who wants to go next? Where's Gabriela Marquez? She always has a lot of questions.
I'm here. You just see if this works. Hello. Can you guys see me?
Yeah, we can see you.
Oh, okay. I just have one question. I'm more into the rehabilitation parts of periodization. So I'd just like to know what sort of recovery modalities do you use and how often do you use them?
So our recovery modalities are, again, extremely individualized per player. One recovery modality does not affect all the same way. So we do have our recovery days, match day +1, match day +2, whereas our preference is match day +1, the day directly after game. It's passive recovery. We give the players an off day. They get to be with their families. We find this helps on the mental side much more than the physical side, even though research has shown to get active recovery in as quickly as possible. Then we'll use the second recovery day as the active recovery. We'll meet at the field. We'll do active recovery in the sense that get the players on the bicycles, get that aerobic system going. We'll get players doing yoga. We'll get players stretching it out. Naturally, while this is going on, the other players who didn't play, they'll be having a full training session. And it goes beyond the training session itself. Each player has their own little preferences. Some players enjoy magnesium baths. Others like going in a hyperbaric chamber. Another player who enjoys ice baths immediately after the game, the day after the game. The research doesn't necessarily always support all of these. However, the placebo effect is very important. If the player feels they are recovering, they are recovering. It sounds odd, but it works.
Nico, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that's my biggest thing when we talk about recovery is placebo. Just because it hasn't been scientifically validated doesn't mean that it isn't a thing. If placebo works, it works. If you know what I mean. If it works for a player, it's the same thing.
Fully correct. So it can be something as simple as stretching after a session or match day. If it works. We do provide
and sports massage.
Massage, definitely. Unfortunately, we only have one physiotherapist, so he is a little overworked to massage a full squad of 30 players. It's close to impossible. However, in that case, we would outsource that. Some players, they don't like massages whatsoever. They feel that the manual manipulation of their muscles actually hurts them more than the recovery is worth it. So then we'd rather find something else for them. Ideally, we'd also have access to a cryo chamber and so forth, but naturally, we're still working towards that.
I think one of that is just the individualization, Gabby. It's like, that's so key as well. And it's what works for one player is never going to work for the other player. So if you just know exactly kind of what does what for certain players, if you can individualize it, like when you talk about just that extra bit of peak performance, those are the kind of things that you want to look out for.
For sure.
Do you have any other questions, Gabby?
What did I write?
You've got about
this one's a bit. I was gonna ask. Why is SA football so behind on European football? I don't know. I'm just looking at the different the way we play. If I look at the Champions League and then I look at the PSL, do you know what the difference is? Why aren't we doing so well? If
there's a lot of factors at play. At the end of the day, I understand that South African football is not as attractive and as competitive as European football, and that is true. We're not quite there yet. And my personal, this is my opinion, is that it starts at a developmental level, starting with children, especially in South Africa. We do not have the same foundation as athletes have in Europe. Whereas a European athlete at the age of 18 has a full foundation. They've been in a football academy or football school for the past 10 years of their life. They can immediately start hitting peak performance levels. Where I do coordinate our youth academy, which is 2 teams. We have an under 21 and under 18 team. And we have players arriving who've never done a deep squat in their entire life. They've got no technique whatsoever. They've never done a clean. They've never done a deadlift. So that's why we have to take about a good year or 2 just to get them on a physical level, whether it's coordination, whether it's just creating that foundation that they have some sort of resilience towards injury prevention.
The base training, we don't really have that much.
Exactly. And those players that don't have this foundation, they end up only having, I think I read a research article, a maximum career span of 4 to 5 years on average, compared to a European player who has a career span, well, you get to see Ronaldo, who's in his 30s and he's still going strong. That is a career span of nearly 20 years. So there is a massive gap in that sense. And I find the foundation of the developmental level is extremely lacking.
Okay.
So that's, you guys, I guess, that's where you come in, because when you guys are starting out now with kind of working and stuff, that's where you're going to be starting, is the youngsters, the kind of children that are at school, the youth kind of academies, those kind of things. So such a key critical area going forward, in the greater scheme of things. Even if those children aren't always becoming professional athletes, at least they're making the pool, the talent pool, a lot larger and stronger that we are choosing from eventually when we get up to that level. Who wants to go next? Who has some questions? Is Gerard there? And on
Hi.
How's it, Gerard?
Good, thanks. And you?
Good. You can go ahead.
Okay, so I heard you said like the players coming in with the youth academies, they don't know how to deep squat and clean. My question was actually, do you guys incorporate Olympic lifting? Like, for instance, I don't think you do snatches, but like a clean and jerk or something like for power or strength in your periodization, or how do you guys do your power? What exercises actually do you guys do?
So I personally am not a fan of powerlifting and Olympic lifts. It's something that it's a matter of prioritization. I haven't found especially youth players who are capable enough to get there. There's other priorities I have to cover, especially covering technique, other physical components. Naturally, if you start overloading with Olympic lifts, it can, it can have a carryover effect for 2-3 days where the player is in delayed onset muscle soreness. Yeah. So out of that prioritization, I know the gentlemen at Stellenbosch Football Club, they're a massive fan of it and they use it a lot. Whereas myself, I haven't found a need for it yet. But with my first team guys, we do try it every here and there. It is not our main concern, but we do a lot of power training. We start with context-specific on-field power training, as football-specific as possible. When do we use power? Extremely explosive moments of jumping, of landing, of pushing off, acceleration moments. So we try to do those with push-offs. And if you want specific gym exercises, again, you start with your principles, body weight training first. Only then, after a while, technique is correct, they are comfortable. Then you start working into more loaded movements. Some of my favorites like single leg RDLs, Bulgarian split squats. It's not necessarily always important to load these as a powerlifter would, or as a normal gym goer or conditioning coach would like. But if you can cover the bare minimum of body weight movements, whether it's laterally, horizontally, you do get to cover the basics, and it is enough for a player to perform. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
And of course, obviously, plyometrics, those kind of things, it's pretty much standard. You don't always need so much weight or anything like that.
Exactly. Even plyos we do once a week. Again, tactical periodization, you touch on it. Only in preseason do you actually load, and that is your opportunity to properly get them there.
Yeah, sure. Gerard, do you have any more questions?
No, nothing from my side. Thank you.
All right. Well, I think we might as well just go through everyone. So Arne, you better think quick. But I know he has questions because he's into his footy as well.
Yeah, sure. Throw me into the deep end, Matt.
Yeah.
Well, I think no one's really asked about the GPS systems. I didn't think there were any questions, but I wanted to know, well, basically it requires a bit of funding for teams to actually implement that. So I wanted to ask if, for working with a team that doesn't necessarily have that funding, if there's like a reliable replacement for that in terms of tracking player performance.
So one thing I can suggest, if you're on a very low budget, is the research is out there for specific small-sided games, for specific movements. Naturally, you as a conditioning coach, like I myself, I have a 20-minute slot each training session with the players. Yeah. And in that 20 minutes, not only do I cover the warm-up, but I have maybe sometimes a 10-minute, sometimes a 5-minute conditioning slot. And if you can calculate the most important aspects of what metrics you want to look at. So if I want to actually my boys to hit top speed, I can create specific drills. Doesn't need to be too complex, of distances, and then from those distances I can calculate how much they can actually hit those numbers. Yeah. And if you can pay attention enough in a football match, you can actually tell, okay, we've hit 7 offensive counters, and in those 7 offensive counters my wingers have hit a good 40-meter bout of top speed high intensity sprint distance. Yeah. So that goes to show for me that the marker or the bar set is 4 times in a training session to hit that top speed. So that way you can calculate it. Any other ways, like I said, there's phone apps out there, a phone strap that goes on your arm. They're about 150 Rand. You use free apps like Strava, you can calculate it. It may be a bit annoying at first, but if you strap it on tight enough, after a while you forget that it's there.
Also, it's free, I think, so it's much more
exactly.
Well, I guess,
everyone has a phone.
Phone strap or GPS watch kind of thing, you can calculate those things as well. It's just obviously the finer details like accelerations, decelerations, those kind of things you might not be able to pick up too well. But I mean, eyeballing it, observing kind of thing as well. You just need a kind of broad understanding of what your players are going through, and then you can start obviously implementing as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So GPS is a luxury. Many clubs don't realize that. They think it is the foundation to performance, but it's not. There are much more important things at hand, such as nutrition, load monitoring, that you can tick off before you actually touch on GPS. Yeah.
So look, I think we're going to run out of time in about a minute, less than a minute. I just wanted to say, Nico, thanks very much for joining us and for your valuable input. I think, the students that's here definitely got something out of it. And I really appreciate your time. My nose is going to cut out soon. I don't want to do it while you're talking though.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, guys. You are always welcome to contact me in your own time. I'm readily available, happy to discuss anything. And if you need my information, I'm sure Matt has it for you.
Through and we can kind of just forward in any important information.
Perfect.
Thanks very much. Thanks, guys.